Hello everyone. I am Donna. Today I am here again with a very interesting story. It is January 30th, 1939. The Spanish Civil War is bleeding out in the mud of Catalonia. For nearly 3 years, Spain has been tearing itself apart in a brutal, fratricidal conflict that will soon serve as the dress rehearsal for the Second World War. On one side, you have the nationalists, led by General Francisco Franco, backed by the military might of Hitler's Germany and Mussolini's Italy. On the other side, you have the Republicans, a fractured coalition of communists, anarchists, socialists, and Democrats, fighting a desperate, losing battle to save their democratically elected government. By this freezing January morning, the war is effectively over. The Republicans have lost. Barcelona has fallen. Hundreds of thousands of desperate refugees, along with the remnants of the shattered Republican army, are trudging through the snow and mud toward the French border, fleeing the advancing fascist troops. The air is thick with panic, defeat, and the bitter thirst for revenge. Amidst this apocalyptic retreat, a group of Republican soldiers arrives at the sanctuary of Santa Maria del Collel, a monastery that has been converted into a makeshift prison. They are dragging with them a group of high-profile nationalist prisoners. The order comes down from the chaotic, disintegrating chain of command: execute them. 50 men are marched out into the freezing rain, lined up against the stone wall of the monastery courtyard, and told to face the firing squad. One of these men is not just a soldier. He is Rafael Sanchez Mazas. He is an aristocrat, a poet, and most importantly, one of the founding fathers of the Falange, the Spanish Fascist Party. He is the man who helped coin the party's slogans, who wrote its anthem, Cara al Sol, and who provided the intellectual and romantic justification for the violence that has just consumed the country. He is, in the eyes of the men pointing rifles at him, the very architect of their misery. The command is given. The rifles crack. 50 men fall. But Sanchez Mazas does not die. In the fraction of a second before the bullets hit, he ducks. He scrambles into the dense, rain-soaked forest surrounding the monastery, sliding down ravines and crawling through the freezing mud. Behind him, he hears the shouts of the militiamen, realizing they are one body short. The hounds are released. The manhunt begins. Sanchez Mazas finds a small hollow under the roots of a tree, pressing his body into the mud, holding his breath as the sound of boots and snapping branches draws closer. And then, the branches part. A young Republican militiaman stands towering over him. The soldier is holding a rifle, his finger on the trigger. He looks down into the hole. Sanchez Mazas looks up. They lock eyes. This is the moment where time stops. The fascist poet, the ideologue of the extreme right, is entirely at the mercy of a broken, defeated, angry young man whose country has just been destroyed by the very ideology Sanchez Mazas helped create. There is no strategic reason to spare him. There is no tactical advantage. There is only the rain, the mud, and the rifle. From a distance, another voice calls out through the trees. Is anyone over there? The young soldier does not break eye contact with Sanchez Mazas. He stares at the shivering, pathetic man in the dirt. And then, he turns his head and yells back. No. There's nobody here. The soldier lowers his rifle. He turns his back on the fascist, walks away into the rain, and disappears into the fog of history. Why did he do it? Was it exhaustion? Was it an extreme, incomprehensible act of mercy? Was he simply sick to death of the killing? This single, electrifying moment is the obsession at the center of Javier Cercas's masterpiece, Soldiers of Salamis. It is a novel, yes, but it is a novel desperately trying to be a true story. It is a work of autofiction that blurs the lines between investigative journalism, historical biography, and deeply personal memoir. Today, we are going to tear this story apart, follow the trail of the escaped fascist, dive into the mind of a writer losing his grip on reality, and hunt down the ghost of the soldier who decided, against all logic, to lower his gun. The broken writer and the fascist poet. To understand the sheer weight of this story, we first have to understand the man telling it. In the book, the narrator is named Javier Cercas. He is a fictionalized version of the real author, living a life that is rapidly falling to pieces. His wife has just left him. His father has recently passed away, severing his connection to his own family's past. Worst of all, his career as a novelist is completely dead. He wrote 1 or 2 mediocre books that nobody read, and now he is working as a cultural journalist for a local newspaper, churning out fluff pieces and interviews he doesn't care about. He is depressed, aimless, and sleepwalking through his own life. Everything changes when he gets an assignment to interview Rafael Sánchez Felosio, a highly respected Spanish writer. Felosio happens to be the son of Rafael Sánchez Mazas, the fascist founder. During the interview, almost as a casual aside, Felosio mentions the story of his father's miraculous escape from the firing squad at Colel, and the nameless soldier who spared his life. The anecdote strikes Cercas like a lightning bolt. It is an impossible contradiction. Cercas himself is a man of the left. He despises fascism. He knows exactly what Sánchez Mazas represented. But as a writer, he is captivated by the raw, unadulterated humanity of that moment in the woods. He becomes obsessed. He decides that this is the story he has to write. Not a novel, but a true tale. A meticulously researched, historically flawless account of what happened in those woods, and more importantly, why it happened. He throws himself into the archives. He starts digging up everything he can find about Rafael Sánchez Mazas. And what he finds is a deeply uncomfortable portrait of a man who used the beauty of language to ignite a horrific war. You have to understand who Sánchez Mazas was in the 1920s and 30s. He wasn't a thug. He wasn't a street brawler. He was a wealthy, highly educated aristocrat. He spent years living in Italy, where he watched Mussolini's rise to power, not with horror, but with romantic awe. Sánchez Mazas believed that Spain was decaying, crippled by chaotic democracy and left-wing secularism. He wanted a return to the glorious, imperial Spain of the past, a Spain of poetry, swords, Catholicism, and empire. He, along with José Antonio Primo de Rivera, founded the Phalange. They weaponized poetry. They convinced thousands of young men that violence was not just necessary, but beautiful. That it was a cleansing fire. They created an aesthetic of fascism. And it worked. The country plunged into a civil war that would claim hundreds of thousands of lives. But when the war actually broke out, the reality of the violence caught up with the architects of it. Sánchez Mazas was trapped in Madrid, which remained in Republican hands. He was hunted down, imprisoned, and shuffled from prison to prison for years, while the war raged outside. He was stripped of his fine clothes, his status, and his power. By the time he was dragged to the firing squad at Colel in 1939, he wasn't a glorious imperial warrior. He was a terrified, half-blind, starving prisoner of war. Cercas maps out all of this. He writes the story of Sánchez Mazas. He tracks down the exact location of the execution. He interviews historians. But the more he digs into the survival of the fascist, the more incredible the story becomes. Because the soldier who spared him was only the beginning of the miracle. When the young militiaman walked away, Sánchez Mazas was left alone in the freezing mud. He had survived the bullets, but he was completely isolated behind enemy lines. He had lost his glasses, meaning he was practically blind. He was starving, soaking wet, and surrounded by retreating Republican soldiers who would shoot him on sight if they recognized him. 4 days, he wandered blindly through the forest of Cornellà de Terry. He drank from muddy puddles. He ate raw roots and chewed on leaves. He was a ghost haunting the woods, waiting to die. Until he stumbled across them. Deep in the woods, Sánchez Mazas ran into 3 young men. They were heavily armed. They were Republicans. But they weren't looking for fascists to kill, they were hiding. They were deserters. Their names were Daniel Angelots, Per Figueras, and Joaquim Amargos. They were local boys who had fought for the Republic, realized the war was hopelessly lost, and fled into the woods to wait for it to be over, hoping to avoid being forced into a suicidal last stand at the border. Sánchez Mazas was terrified. These men were his mortal enemies. But in one of the most absurd, beautiful twists of fate, the ideological labels completely dissolved in the face of raw human necessity. Sánchez Mazas told them who he was. He didn't lie. He gave them his real name. The boys recognized it. They knew exactly who this starving, blind man was. They knew he was a founding father of the movement that had just destroyed their republic. And they decided to feed him. They took him into their camp. They shared their meager rations. They called themselves the Friends of the Forest. For over a week, these three Republican deserters and the millionaire founder of Spanish Fascism lived together in the dirt. They formed an inexplicable bond. They danced this strange, delicate dance of survival, hiding together from the retreating Republican patrols, waiting for the nationalists to arrive. Sanchez Mazas kept a small notebook during this time. He wrote down the names of the boys. He promised them that if they kept him alive until Franco's troops arrived, he would protect them. He would use his immense power in the new regime to make sure they were not executed by the victorious fascists. And eventually, the nationalists did arrive. The forest was taken. Sanchez Mazas stepped out of the woods, identified himself to the victorious troops, and was hailed as a resurrected hero. The fascist martyr had returned from the dead. He kept his promise to the boys. When the fascist purges began, when tens of thousands of Republicans were being lined up against walls and shot by Franco's regime, Sanchez Mazas personally intervened. He secured pardons and safe passage for the Friends of the Forest. He saved their lives, just as they had saved his. Cercas uncovers all of this. He even manages to track down and interview the surviving members of the Friends of the Forest, now incredibly old men. He gets their first-hand accounts. He writes the book. He calls it Soldiers of Salamis. He delivers the manuscript to his publisher. It is a great historical account. It is factually accurate. It tells a complete story. There is only one problem. It's terrible. Cercas reads his own manuscript and feels a profound sense of failure. The book is dead on the page. It has no soul. And he knows exactly why. He has written a book about a fascist. He has spent hundreds of pages exploring the mind of a man who romanticized violence and helped plunge Spain into darkness. Yes, Sanchez Mazas suffered, and yes, his survival was fascinating. But at the end of the day, Sanchez Mazas went back to Madrid and became a high-ranking minister in Francisco Franco's brutal, totalitarian government. Though Sanchez Mazas eventually grew disillusioned with politics and retreated into a wealthy, melancholic retirement, he was never a hero. He was on the wrong side of history, and he won. The book is missing its moral center. It is missing the only person who actually matters. The militiaman. The anonymous boy who looked the fascist in the eye and said, "There's nobody here." Without him, the story is just a historical curiosity. With him, it is a story about the absolute essence of humanity. But Cercas has hit a brick wall. How do you find a nameless soldier from 1939? He left no record. He vanished into the retreat toward France. He is a ghost. And because Cercas refuses to invent him, because he demands that this be a true tale, the book stalls out. Cercas spirals back into depression. And then, real life delivers a miracle in the form of Roberto Bolaño. Yes, the actual, legendary Chilean author, Roberto Bolaño, who was living in a small coastal town in Catalonia at the time. In the novel, Cercas is asked by his newspaper to do a brief interview with Bolaño. They meet, they talk about literature, and they strike up a bizarre, erratic friendship. During one of their conversations, Bolaño tells Cercas a story. Years ago, in the late 1980s, Bolaño was working as a night watchman at a campsite in the coastal town of Estrella del March. One summer, a man stayed at the campsite. He was an old Spaniard, tough as leather, covered in horrific battle scars. He was a veteran of the Spanish Civil War. His name was Antoni Miralles. Bolaño tells Cercas that Miralles was the most extraordinary man he ever met. Miralles had fought for the Republic. When the Republic collapsed in 1939, he crossed the border into France, only to be thrown into a miserable refugee internment camp by the French government. But Miralles was a born fighter. When World War II broke out and the Nazis invaded France, Miralles didn't give up. He joined the French Foreign Legion. He was sent to North Africa. He fought in the brutal desert campaigns against Rommel. He joined General Leclerc's legendary 2nd Armored Division. He fought his way from the deserts of Chad, all the way up through Europe, and was among the very first Allied soldiers to enter and liberate Paris. He fought all the way to Germany, stepping on a landmine in the final days of the war, which left his body permanently shattered. Miralles was a true warrior for freedom. He fought fascism across 2 continents for nearly 10 straight years. And yet, he had nothing to show for it. He was a forgotten old man, living in a trailer at a campsite, mourning his dead friends, and dancing alone to an old Spanish pasodoble called Suspiros de España. Cercas listens to Bolaño's story, completely captivated. But then, Bolaño drops a detail that makes Cercas's blood run cold. Bolaño casually mentions that during the final days of the Spanish Civil War, Miralles was part of the Republican rearguard retreating through Catalonia. Specifically, his unit was stationed at the monastery of Santa Maria del Collel, the exact location of the firing squad. In January 1939, the exact date of the execution. Cercas's mind explodes. The timeline fits perfectly. The location fits perfectly. The geography, the unit, the ideology. Everything aligns. Could Antoni Miralles be the militiaman who spared Rafael Sánchez Mazas? The hunt for Antoni Miralles. The entire final third of the novel shifts gears from a historical biography into a frantic, desperate detective story. Cercas is consumed by the idea that Miralles is his ghost. If he can find Miralles, he can find the soul of his book. He can ask him the question that has been burning a hole in his mind: why did you let him live? But finding Miralles is almost impossible. Bolaño hasn't seen the man in over a decade. All he knows is that Miralles eventually moved to France and was living somewhere near Dijon. Cercas turns his apartment into a war room. He gets his hands on French phone books. He starts calling every single Miralles in the Burgundy region of France. He calls veteran associations for the French Foreign Legion. He calls hospitals. He hits dead end after dead end. Dozens of phone calls. Hundreds of rejections. The trail is completely cold. He is searching for a man who is likely dead, a forgotten casualty of time. But Cercas cannot let it go. His own salvation as a writer is now entirely tied to the existence of this old soldier. Finally, against all odds, a breakthrough. A veterans' hospital in the city of Dijon confirms they have an elderly resident named Antoni Miralles. He matches the description. He has the scars. He fought with Leclerc. Cercas doesn't hesitate. He packs a bag, buys a train ticket, and travels from Spain into the heart of France. He is traveling backward through history, tracing the exact route the defeated Republican army took when they fled into exile. When Cercas arrives at the nursing home in Dijon, the atmosphere is utterly mundane. There is no grand fanfare. It is just a quiet, sterile facility filled with the forgotten elderly. Cercas is led to a room, and there he is. Antoni Miralles. He is an old, frail man. The fierce warrior who marched across deserts and liberated capital cities is now confined to a small room, waiting for the end of his life. Cercas introduces himself. He explains that he is a writer, that he is researching the Spanish Civil War, and that a mutual friend, Roberto Bolaño, told him to reach out. Miralles is guarded at first, but eventually, he opens up. He is desperately lonely. He hasn't had a visitor in years. For hours, the two men talk. They talk about youth, about memory, about the sheer randomness of survival. Miralles talks about his time in the desert. He talks about the boys he fought alongside Lila, Garcia, and the others. He cries when he remembers them. He tells Cercas that the real heroes aren't the ones who survive. The real heroes are the ones who stay forever young in the ground, the ones who gave up everything so that Europe could be free, and whom nobody ever remembers. Miralles is the ultimate counterweight to Sánchez Mazas. Sánchez Mazas was a man of words, an intellectual who started a war but never fought in it, who survived, grew rich, and died in a comfortable bed. Miralles is a man of action, a man who believed in nothing but his comrades and liberty, who fought on the front lines for a decade, and who is now dying in total obscurity. The tension in the room builds. The audience knows exactly what Cercas is waiting to ask. The entire book has been leading to this exact conversation. Finally, Cercas steers the conversation to January 1939. He mentions the retreat. He mentions the monastery at Collel. He asks Miralles if he remembers the firing squad. Miralles pauses. He looks at Cercas. Cercas describes the escape. He describes the fascist hiding in the mud. He describes the soldier looking down the barrel of his rifle. And then, he asks the question directly. Was it you? Were you the soldier who let him go? The silence in the room is deafening. Miralles looks at the young journalist. A faint, almost imperceptible smile plays on his lips. No, Miralles says softly. That wasn't me. I don't know what you're talking about. He denies it. Cercas refuses to accept this. He presses him. He brings up the dates, the locations, the impossibility of it being anyone else. He practically begs Miralles to admit it. It was you, wasn't it? Cercas pleads. Miralles continues to deny it, but his denials are playful. They are ambiguous. He leaves just enough room for doubt. He looks at Cercas with eyes that have seen the absolute worst of the 20th century, and he says something profound. He tells Cercas that it doesn't matter if it was him or someone else. He says that whoever that young boy in the forest was, he didn't spare the fascist because of some grand moral philosophy. He didn't do it out of political solidarity. He did it because he was tired. He was sick of the blood. He was sick of the killing. He looked at another human being shivering in the mud, and in that split second, the instinct for life overpowered the machinery of death. Cercas realizes, right then and there, that he is never going to get a definitive confession. Miralles will take his secret to the grave. But Cercas also realizes something far more important: it doesn't matter. The genius of Javier Cercas's novel lies in its final revelation. The quest for historical certainty, the need to perfectly verify the facts, is replaced by the power of myth and memory. Early in the novel, there is a discussion about the Battle of Salamis. This was the legendary naval battle in ancient Greece where a vastly outnumbered fleet of Greeks managed to defeat the invading Persian Empire. If the Greeks had lost at Salamis, Western civilization as we know it, democracy, philosophy, art, might have been extinguished before it truly began. The people who fought in that battle were not gods. They were not legendary superheroes. They were ordinary farmers, fishermen, and citizens. They were anonymous men standing shoulder to shoulder, holding the line against the darkness. They were the soldiers of Salamis. Throughout the book, the phrase soldiers of Salamis seems to mock Cercas. Sanchez Mazas and his fascist friends believed they were the new soldiers of Salamis, saving Spain from the barbarism of communism. But that was a lie. They were the invaders. They were the ones destroying civilization. As Cercas sits in the room with Antoni Miralles, looking at the scars on the old man's face, he finally understands what the title of his book actually means. Miralles and his comrades, the men who fought in the mud of Spain, the sands of Africa, and the ruins of Europe, they are the true soldiers of Salamis. They are the nameless, faceless men who threw their bodies onto the gears of the fascist machine to buy the rest of us time. They didn't do it for fame. They didn't do it for wealth. They did it because it had to be done. And more importantly, true civilization isn't just about winning battles. It is about the capacity for mercy. The act of the soldier in the forest lowering his gun, refusing to shoot a defenseless man, even when that man is the enemy, is the ultimate victory of humanity over totalitarianism. Fascism demands death. Humanity demands life. By sparing Sanchez Mazas, the militiaman didn't just save a fascist, he saved his own soul. He proved that even at the very bottom of the abyss, after 3 years of slaughter, a human being can still choose grace. Cercas leaves the nursing home. He gets back on the train. He returns to Spain. He finally knows how to finish his book. He realizes that his job as a writer is not merely to record facts. His job is to rescue men like Miralles from the absolute tyranny of forgetting. History is incredibly cruel. It remembers the politicians, the dictators, and the wealthy poets. History remembers Rafael Sanchez Mazas. There are streets named after him. But history forgets the men who actually bled in the dirt. History forgets the boys left behind in the desert. History leaves Antoni Miralles to rot in a nursing home in Dijon. Cercas decides that he will use his words to fight back against the erasure of time. He writes the final act of the novel as a soaring, emotional tribute to the militiamen. By writing Soldiers of Salamis, Cercas gives the nameless soldier a monument that is stronger than bronze or stone. He creates a myth that will live forever. The novel ends with an overwhelming sense of urgency. We are running out of time to thank the people who saved the world. The generation that stood up to the great darkness of the 20th century is almost gone. When they die, their memories die with them. All that is left are the stories we choose to tell. Soldiers of Salamis is a masterpiece because it admits its own failure as a historical document, and in doing so, succeeds as a profound work of art. It tells us that we might not be able to know everything for certain, but we must choose to believe in the fundamental decency of ordinary people. We must believe that in the freezing rain, surrounded by death, someone will choose to lower their gun. Javier Cercas set out to find a fascist, and instead, he found a hero. And by writing his story, he ensured that the old man dancing to the pasodoble in a forgotten campsite, remembering his dead friends, will never, ever be forgotten.